They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello and welcome. This is Best of the Rest, a show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received by critics and dismissed by moviegoers to talk about all the things the movie does well. My name is Chris Logan.
And I'm Andrew Williams.
And today we are talking about the 2011 movie Green Lantern. Andrew, are you excited about this one?
I am. I actually saw this movie in theaters 3 times when it came out. So
that is crazy. Why would you see it 3 times?
My friends and I all went to a midnight premiere the first time. And I think that was just kind of like, we were all just excited. So we went and saw the midnight premiere. And then the next day, I think I saw it again with my brother and sister. And then the next day I saw it again with my dad.
Okay. So you weren't dragged to the theaters repeatedly.
No. I actively sought this out.
Well, this will be interesting because I had never seen this movie. I did not see it in theaters. I knew of its reputation shortly after release and just didn't think it sounded like something I wanted to watch. And watching it for this show is the first time I sat through this movie from beginning to end. So this will be
interesting.
Interesting talk here. Now, were you hyped for this movie before it came out?
I was extremely.
I would assume so if you saw it 3 times in theaters.
Yeah, I would hope so. The first trailer I remember kind of got a mixed reaction. People were kind of split as to what they thought it looked like, but there was the second trailer that came out, I think it was around WonderCon that year. And it's just like everybody was suddenly like, this looks awesome. Green Lantern as a comic was firing on all cylinders. People were pretty amped about the character potentially reaching that like Batman, Superman echelon of public awareness of like, okay, like people are going to know who Green Lantern is. This is going to be, a big deal.
Well, you're much more versed in the world of comic books than I am. So I'll be asking you plenty of questions about how this movie functions as an adaptation and whether or not it does the character right. But let's set the stage a little bit for this movie coming out. June 17th, 2011, the same weekend as Mr. Popper's Penguins. Everybody remembers that one very fondly, right?
Yeah, of course.
It took a long time for this movie to make it to the theaters. It's been in development since 1997, but it finally releases in the middle of what I would consider the renaissance of superhero movies that really starts in 2000 with X-Men, followed by Spider-Man, and then the floodgates kind of open for any and all superheroes to get adapted. Of course, we know the MCU gets off the ground in 2008 with Iron Man, and this is right before Avengers comes out, which was 2012.
So yeah, I mean, this is coming out the same summer as Thor and Captain America: The First Avenger. It's also just a couple of weeks after X-Men First Class. So like we're at the peak at this point. We're well in the thick of it. Not the peak necessarily.
Yeah,
we're deep in the thick of it.
It's not just 1 or 2 superhero movies per summer. It's an all year thing. $200 million budget. So Warner Bros. Was completely behind this movie, potentially launching their own franchise or universe, but ultimately it just brought in $219 million at the box office. So when you consider things like marketing, likely did not pull any kind of profit for the studio.
Well, yeah, and if you compare it to the other movies that came out that year, they all made significantly more money, and all of them I think cost less. So it was definitely not great on that box office front.
Was not reviewed well, just the 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I mentioned already, I kind of heard the reception for this movie, kind of the public opinion of the movie was not good. Laughably bad, I think, is a good way to describe the reputation this movie has earned since then.
Yeah, I think the most generous statements I've heard about this movie are that it's a wasted opportunity, that it kind of takes a lot of potential and just doesn't really know what to do with it.
Most notably, I think Ryan Reynolds himself has openly mocked the movie, of course, in both Deadpool movies as references to how bad this movie is.
Even going so far as the end of Deadpool 2 to show Deadpool shooting Ryan Reynolds reading the Green Lantern.
Literally killing himself. Yes.
Yes.
But you know what? We're going to take a look at it. We've watched this movie, and by golly, I think there is some nice things that we can say about it. I think there's some things that this movie does very well, I would argue.
And I don't think it's as hard as people make it out to be either. I think there's I don't want to say like almost a cult of personality about this movie, or I don't want to say that it's like a hot take to enjoy it, but I don't think it's at all deserving its reputation. And actually recently, Ryan Reynolds himself has finally sat down and he's claiming rather to have watched it for the first time in its entirety ever.
He skipped the premiere, apparently.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of people that have claimed to have never watched the stuff they're in, but even he has claimed that perhaps he judged it too harshly. So I'm excited to talk about it.
I certainly enjoyed watching it. I'll say that up front. I did not expect I would. You know, the whole point of this podcast is to kind of challenge ourselves personally to have more positive conversations, to focus on the positives. And this one, not as much of a challenge as I think some of the other movies we're going to be watching will be. Let's take a look at the cast. A great cast. I mean, the cast is not the issue with this movie. I'll say that. But I want to ask you, before we run through name by name, I want to start in the spirit of this podcast with the high point, with one actor that you think single-handedly elevated the entire movie, or at the very least elevated the role that they were given. Who was your MVP of this movie?
I think there is undoubtedly and unquestionably one MVP of this movie, and his name is Mark Strong.
Oh, I agree 100%.
There is absolutely no question that guy has thrown himself into this. He is 100% dedicated to this role. He gives it the right level of gravitas. He's got the right level of like being intimidating. He is absolutely 110% into this role, and it shows.
I loved every second he was on screen.
He steals every scene that he's in, and even if there's stuff around him that's not necessarily working well, he is elevating it up single-handedly.
Yeah, and what a surprise from Mark Strong. I mean, no disrespect to the man, but he's kind of hired to be like generic bad guy, bald bad guy. Yeah. That's kind of his bread and butter.
You look at him like in like Kick-Ass or Sherlock Holmes or things like that. He's fairly generic. Like it's fairly straightforward, you know, menacing bald guy. And to see him take this and take it up to like such an unbelievable level, like to the point that like if you were asking me for some of the best DC castings ever, I'd probably put him in the running. Like
100%. I can't picture anyone else as Sinestro now, and I think that's really the mark of an actor, right? Killing it in terms of a superhero movie or playing a character that's existed in other iterations before. This is not hyperbole, people. You've got Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. You've got Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. You've got Mark Strong as Sinestro. He's up there.
He is. He's
the next person. Inevitably, this series is going to be rebooted. We're going to get another Green Lantern movie. Man, just bring Mark Strong back. Just let him do it again.
Yeah, like I don't even care. I don't even care if he's in Shazam again. No. Just do it.
And he looks great too. They've got the reddish pink skin. I mean, he looks like Sinestro. He looks like comic Sinestro. Pointy ears. They're doing something with his eyes. I don't know how much of that is like CG, how much is practical, but you can see his performance through whatever makeup or prosthetics or CG they have going on with him.
I believe it's a mix. I believe all the face stuff is prosthetic, and then the suits are just CGI. So because I feel like I remember seeing a picture of the production where like he's in the mocap suit, but he's got the
he's got a pink head.
Yeah, so imagine that to be. But and again, that to me makes it all the more impressive that despite that kind of a situation you could potentially find like encumbering as an actor, he's still coming through so strongly. Pun intended. Undoubtedly the MVP of this movie. I would go farther. He's the MVP of every superhero movie that came out that summer.
Oh, that's a good question. What else came out that summer?
You have Thor, Captain America, and X-Men First Class.
I might have to agree with you on that.
Like Chris Evans gets there as Captain America, but it ain't in that movie.
And it's certainly not blonde eyebrow Chris Hemsworth and Thor.
No, God, that's so off-putting. I forget about that. And then I rewatch it and I'm like, oh, goodness.
Now, of course, we have Ryan Reynolds playing Hal Jordan, also known as Green Lantern. Is it the right move? Again, you're much more familiar with the Green Lantern comic than I. Is it the right move to have Hal Jordan in this movie?
To have Hal Jordan?
Any of the other Green Lanterns?
Oh, this is something where there was a lot of debate where, you know, you could have made the decision to use somebody like Jon Stewart. who was seen notably in the Justice League cartoons. I think Hal Jordan is the first of the Silver Age Green Lanterns. The rest all tend to come from his role as Green Lantern. I don't think it would have been difficult to use somebody else, but the decision to use Hal Jordan, I think, is fine.
Now, Reynolds was, I think, best described as a rising star at this point. He certainly had larger roles come after this, but before this, it's mostly comedic roles. He had his sitcom, Two Guys and a Girl. There's a pizza place involved with that at some point. He was probably best known as Van Wilder. You think
at this point, Van Wilder, he had done a couple of turns in comic book movies before this, obviously in the well-known Blade Trinity, as well as the small indie picture Wolverine Origins.
That was before this, huh?
Yeah.
So he played Wade Wilson before he played
Wolverine Origins was 2009, I think, and Blade Trinity, I think, was 2007. And there was definitely a mixed reception to his casting. A lot of people thought, like you said, this is Van Wilder, basically.
Ryan Reynolds known for a smart-ass persona, essentially. And I don't know a lot about Hal Jordan, but he's not quippy as far as I know.
He's definitely kind of a prick, and he's definitely kind of an asshole just because his whole character is like the quickest comparison I would probably have is like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, which is why for a while Tom Cruise as Hal Jordan was a fan casting for a lot of people, because basically Maverick is Hal Jordan. That kind of attitude is what you're looking for, and there was a lot of people that thought Reynolds was too far past that. Just a little bit too jokey, a little too douchey, just a little too far.
Well, I think he does a good job, and I'll say this in his defense, if that's even necessary, he's not playing the typical Ryan Reynolds.
No, he's definitely
holding it back a little bit. He's
definitely holding it back. And
he feels committed.
He feels committed. And I don't think at all, like you talk about the film's weaknesses, I don't think it's him at all. He plays this part perfectly well. Obviously he's no Mark Strong, but who is?
Who is?
No, who is? But I think he does. I think he does a good job here.
Blake Lively as Carol Ferris. Blake Lively, of course, now married to Ryan Reynolds.
Yes.
My wife walked by as I was watching this movie and dropped that nugget of information on me. So
I thought people knew that.
I don't know these things. My wife knows who's married to who, and
well, they do all sorts of fun social media stuff with each other. So I thought people just kind of like caught on to that by now.
Not me, but apparently they met on this movie.
Yeah.
So there's one positive that comes out of this movie, right?
She at this point in time, she was mostly known for like Gossip Girl and like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and the Justin Long vehicle Accepted.
I just added that to my Voodoo collection. It was free. So the only thing I know about that movie is Jonah Hill saying, "Ask me about my winners."
That's another movie that's got like a strange amount of people that I've heard of in it before. Most of them were anybody you'd heard of. And she'd actually just been in The Town the year before, which I remember liking a lot.
Yeah, that's a great
movie.
So
she was definitely a rising star.
Peter Sarsgaard as Hector Hammond, who is, man, he's making decisions. He is giving it all he's got.
They definitely take some liberties with Hammond's portrayal, but man, that dude is 100% committed to whatever they're doing.
Putting the ham and Hammond, am I right?
He definitely is. He seems to be having a ball.
Angela Bassett is Amanda Waller, and this casting, I'm assuming, is Warner Bros. Future planning. Yeah. I think if they do make more Green Lantern movies after this, or if they tried to do a whole DC universe, that Amanda Waller would have been a sort of connective tissue between them. And that's why you cast somebody like Angela Bassett, who isn't given much to do in this movie.
It's really not. And I do believe the intention was that the idea for Angela Bassett as Amanda Waller would have been to have her kind of be the Nick Fury of these DC movies, kind of have her be the character that can kind of drift between and show up in multiple places to kind of establish that sense of shared universe if this had gone forward. And Angela Bassett as Amanda Waller
I think it's spot on. That's fantastic casting.
Viola Davis is fantastic, and I'm glad that she's getting some more chances to play that character going forward. But man, if this had taken off, Angela Bassett could have been like Mark Strong level casting.
Now, like I mentioned, this was my first time watching the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't read up on the cast or anything before going in. And then all of a sudden, Tim Robbins walks on my screen. And I'm like, Tim Robbins is in this movie. And who does he play? Robert Hammond. He plays somebody's dad.
It's not
a super significant role or anything, but This casting kind of reminded me of like Tommy Lee Jones in Captain America: The First Avenger.
Yeah.
You're just casting somebody like respected, high profile, just to bring some gravitas to the role and some seriousness.
And
I think that was the
I
idea.
feel like that's definitely it. Like obviously you want to round out the cast. You want a couple of heavy hitters, like especially when you've got something like you can't really say Mark Strong or Peter Sarsgaard or Blake Lively or even Ryan Reynolds at this point are like bankable known actors. So like you obviously want to fill it out a little bit. So you get your Angela Bassett, you get Tim Robbins, and it's weird because and this isn't meant as a knock, but like I see Tim Robbins walk on the screen. Like when I heard that, because I remember hearing that Tim Robbins got cast, and that was another sign to me. I'm like, oh man, this movie is such a big deal. Tim Robbins is in it. He just doesn't do nothing movies.
He's an artist.
He's an artist. He's dialed in. But there's times where I'm watching this movie and I'm like, that looks like Tim Robbins. It sounds like Tim Robbins, but it doesn't feel like I'm watching Tim Robbins. Like it's a very odd feeling because it just seems like he's really just he really doesn't. He's another guy like Amanda Waller, isn't really given a lot to do. There's a couple of scenes where he plays like schmoozy senator, where he's just kind of like going up and shaking hands and doing the thing. But yeah, generally speaking, I was just kind of like, man, it definitely you're kind of casting where you're just like, we're bringing somebody in that's got some attention and some gravitas, and we'll go from there.
You got Jeffrey Rush as Tomar Ray, sort of basically a voice role, because that's a CG character. And I think you just want somebody with a nice, smooth voice.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot of exposition in this movie, sort of showing Ryan Reynolds the ropes after he becomes Green Lantern. I think he does a good job. I enjoyed him.
He's a good voice. He obviously he's not given quite as much scenery to chew here as say he is with like Casanova Frankenstein in Mystery Men. But yeah, he does a good job. I remember hearing that he was cast as well. And like, this is a guy that, great voice, a great approach, and perfectly good for that character.
Now, if Mark Strong weren't in this movie, this next casting might be my MVP. Michael Clark Duncan as Kilowog. That is just some spot on casting there. Again, basically a voice role. I don't think he did mocap for Kilowog. You just look at Kilowog like on paper, like in a comic book. He sounds like Michael Clark Duncan. That's what his voice sounds like.
This almost to me feels like one of those fan castings that just became real. Because I remember I feel like I read so much that people were like, Michael Clark Duncan is Kilowog. Michael Clark Duncan is Kilowog. Michael Clark Duncan is Kilowog. Again and again and again, that I feel like we legit willed it into existence. And he's fantastic. He doesn't get a whole lot of scenes here, but like you buy that his character is him. Like he sells like the history that he's got, like all of it. I think he's great. He's fantastic.
I think he's always, rest in peace, Michael Clark Duncan, but always great in everything he does.
He
and no stranger to comic book movies. He's great in Daredevil, a movie I'm sure we're going to talk about one day. He's great in Sin City. I love him every time he shows up. Any other casting that we need to talk about in this movie, Andrew?
Well, I feel like you can't quite talk about this movie without bringing up what might be the strangest casting in this whole movie.
Who's that?
Which is our boy Taika Waititi as Thomas Kalmaku.
I didn't even recognize him at first.
Because like now he's known for like having the gray hair and he keeps it all wild and crazy. And he's got like a beard a lot of the time. And like he's not acting, he doesn't even sound like Taika really to me. Like he's putting on the American accent, like he's doing all of that. But man, like what an odd
Taika, of course, writer and director of Jojo Rabbit,
Thor Ragnarok, Jojo Rabbit.
I
didn't write Thor
the
Ragnarok,
voice of Korg. The voice of Korg. Yes,
obviously, like writer director of Jojo Rabbit, Hunt for the Wilder People. Boy, he's obviously directed Thor Ragnarok. He's directing Thor: Love and Thunder. And so obviously become well known. He's obviously got a part in Suicide. He's got a part in the Suicide Squad. Like he's blown up since this. And it's one of those things that like looking back, it feels so odd watching him here because like he doesn't write or direct this, but he's still in it. So like it's a very odd kind of like acting only thing.
He's just
him.
Hal Jordan's friend, basically.
He's Hal Jordan's buddy that reacts to everything he does in this movie. And like I said, I can't really say a whole lot about it, but it's just very odd. But I feel like you have to bring it up to at least mention how strange it is that Taika Waititi is in this movie.
As mentioned, this movie took quite a long time to get made. A lot of different iterations and versions before we finally ended up with what we got. Mm-hmm. Uh, Apparently, there was a script at one point that was supposed to star Jack Black. That was a comedic take
Yeah.
on the character, and man, that sounds like something, doesn't it?
I think it was written by Robert Smigel, who does a lot of like animated stuff on SNL, like the Ambiguous the Gay Duo and a couple of other things. But yeah, and I remember when that got announced, there were people that were really upset about it. They were like, this is not Green Lantern. This is not what Green Lantern should be.
For the role of Hal Jordan, they considered Bradley Cooper, Justin Timberlake, Jared Leto was up for the role. So they wanted someone young, up and coming. Ended up with Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, ended up with Ryan Reynolds. The story I actually remember reading is that Martin Campbell, the director, who we'll talk about in a minute, was actually like apparently really on the Bradley Cooper train. So, and I remember Bradley Cooper, I think, actually talked about his audition.
I can see that totally.
Like, I actually think Bradley Cooper would have been really good for like Guy Gardner more than necessarily Hal Jordan, because at the time I really kind of remembered him from like Wedding Crashers and stuff like that, where he just plays like a massive douche. I think Sebastian Stan actually said he auditioned for Green Lantern as well. Obviously, the current Winter Soldier.
Well, all those people I mentioned ended up in comic book movies eventually. Bradley Cooper is Rocket Raccoon. Jared Leto is the Joker. Ryan Reynolds got the role and became Deadpool. So everybody gets pulled in at some point.
Except Justin Timberlake.
Not yet. Then you got Martin Campbell directing this. This man's filmography, I mean, wow. GoldenEye, The Mask of Zorro, Casino Royale. He had some huge hits
when the
this.
dude hits it, he hits it hard. He's basically revitalized James Bond twice. Like he revitalized it and then left, and then revitalized it again for the very next Bond actor. Mask of Zorro is probably the most, like, you talk about all those pulp adaptations that weirdly came about in the 90s, where like they did like The Shadow and like Zorro and The Phantom and all of those. Mask of Zorro is probably the only one that like grand slams it out of the friggin' park.
That movie rules.
That movie is awesome.
Looking at a director for this movie, yeah, you want the guy who's not a stranger to franchises, not a stranger to action movies. I mean, The Mask of Zorro, it's basically a superhero movie, complete with action set pieces and everything. So it seems like a slam dunk selection.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the writers. Written by Greg Berlanti, I think has the main credit, but also involved are Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim, who have a little bit of a comic book history. Anything significant in those guys' work?
Well, I think the script it's credited to Greg Berlanti, Mark Guggenheim, Michael Green, and then separately to Michael Goldenberg. So Berlanti and Guggenheim are known essentially for the army of DC shows on the CW. So we're talking Arrow, we're talking
those are well
Flash, we're talking Supergirl, we're talking the new Superman and Lois, Legends of Tomorrow. Like, so they're involved in a lot of that. And I actually think Guggenheim and Berlanti are both also working on the new Green Lantern show for HBO Max. That's the next stage for Green Lantern, seems to be, is this show that's coming up. So both of them are working on that. So they go on to do a lot of superhero stuff as well. Michael Goldenberg is apparently only written 5 movies that ever gotten made: Bed of Roses, Contact, Peter Pan, Harry Potter 4, and Green Lantern, which is a very, very
odd selection of movies.
So the belief is that Berlanti, Guggenheim, and Green wrote their script together, and then Goldenberg was brought in to like rewrite it before shooting started.
Well, let's talk about the movie we got. We already mentioned we enjoyed ourselves. We had a good time with it. Let's talk about some of the stuff that works. Personally, I love the movie. Opens like with some voiceover narration from Jeffrey Rush, some exposition.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote down this. I had to write it down just to remember it. He uses the phrase in the opening narration, "emerald energy of willpower." And right from the beginning, I'm like, all right, this movie's going for it. It's going full comic book. Yeah.
Deep end, no floating.
Drop a line like that in your opening scene. You're really counting on this audience to be there with you. And I was on board.
It's definitely, I remember the movie opened with a ton of exposition. And that's almost always something that I get wary about when a movie has to open with a ton of exposition. But it really, like, the fact that they really did were just kind of like, it's the emerald energy of will. Deal with it. Like, I was like, I respect it. Like, just get past it.
Let's go.
Stop. Don't try to tell me how it works, because I don't care how it works. Like, just go.
Let's jump right to the scene that you think works the best. Your favorite scene in the movie where it's firing on all cylinders. Do you have like a high point in this movie? One scene you can point to and say, this was awesome.
My favorite scene is probably when Sinestro addresses the Corps.
I've got the exact same scene written down here.
It's Sinestro, and he's kind of talking about like the threat that they're facing, and he's talking about like what it means to be a Green Lantern, and like everybody's like sense of, you know, commitment and duty to the core. And
it ends with this. He says, I don't need to tell you your duty. I don't need to tell you who we are. And then all the Green Lanterns start chanting, "We are core," and I'm fist pumping on my couch along with them.
Like it's awesome.
Get you riled up.
Get you pumped. Like it's completely effective. It works extremely well. And Strong just sells it so hard.
It reminds me of that scene in Independence Day where
the president scene
out of nowhere just gives this awesome rousing speech, and you're like, yeah, I want to get in a jet and go fight.
That speech doesn't feel like it belongs in that movie, but it's so good. That scene just works so well because he sells the threat better than anything else has in the entire movie at this point. Like he sells everything about it, and it's great.
This movie sort of has a reputation for not having good visuals. That's kind of what I heard about it, what I expected going in. But I think by and large, it looks pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I would point to what's the name of the planet with all the Green Lanterns?
Oa.
It's just like 2 letters.
It's OA.
Okay. Al Pacino named this planet.
No, that would be Hoorah.
Ooh-ah. So what's significant about it? It looks great.
Mm-hmm.
It looks cosmic. It looks different. It looks something straight out of a comic book. But credit to Martin Campbell here, because a lot of lesser directors, whenever you're working in a completely CG environment, they get really crazy and carried away with the camera work. Specifically, it'll swoop and spin and do things that aren't possible on an actual location or on set or in the real world, and it completely takes you out of it because it feels rubbery or feels fake. Now the camera does zoom around, but it's all stuff that you could do with a crane shot or a helicopter shot. So it really sells this place being a tangible world that we're on.
It speaks to just Campbell's sensibilities as a director, for better or worse, I think. But I think in this case, it's definitely for better, because it means that even though we're in this completely CGI, completely essentially fabricated shots, he still wants to keep the movement very real. I think that's a good thing.
Now, look, we can't talk about visuals and CG without talking about the suits.
Yes.
And I'm going to go on record and say this, and I think the suits look really good.
I agree.
Most of them. I think most of the suits
look
really good. I really like what they do, how each Green Lantern has their own suit that's specific to their species. Because the whole point of a Green Lantern is they're from all across the cosmos, all different species and walks of life. And the suit sort of adapts to each one. Yeah. Like Tamar Ray has like almost like scales. It's sort of like textured to his skin. In that scene with Sinestro's speech, there's a guy in the crowd that's completely made of rock, and he doesn't even have a suit. He just has the Lantern logo on his chest.
On his chest that's cool. Yeah. And like that again shows like a sense of like to me, that's just effort. That's like we clearly designed
smart design
choices. It makes it, because like you see like Jordan's suit and Sinestro's suit look relatively similar because they're both humanoids with like standard, like smooth human skin. So it looks like a suit that matches to that. But even Kilowog's suit has a texture that's more akin to his skin. And so it's a cool look that kind of makes the suits unique. It makes it something that's ultimately individual to the character, to their look. Because even though Jordan and Sinestro's suits are similar, there's still differences. And I like that. I think on Oa, I think everything looks great. I think when you start mixing stuff with the real world, I think that's where some of the more criticisms come in. But even still, I do think that criticism is overstated. I don't think the CG here is any worse than a lot of other stuff.
A big part of this movie's legacy, for better or worse, depending on your take on this, a big part of this movie's legacy is Deadpool, specifically the line in the first Deadpool where Ryan Reynolds breaks the fourth wall and he says not to make a suit animated or green, specifically referring to this movie and how bad his suit looks. And look, we are definitely a show that's focusing on the positive, but we're not going to sit here and lie to you and try to say that, no, you're wrong about the suit. It actually looks great. There's some problems with Hal Jordan's suit. I don't know if it's a case of the technology not quite being there yet for a fully CG suit. We would later see Marvel do this with Iron Man and Spider-Man, Pink Panther, Black Panther, and I don't know how that happened, but
I'm ready. I'm ready for the
often,
CGI Pink Panther suit now. Oh,
their suits are often completely
right.
CG and sometimes looks a little off. You get like a floating head effect, but mostly it works there. Not as well here. I think the problem really comes down to his domino mask being CG and trying to have real eyes show through it. Yeah, there's some issues there, but like you said, it doesn't destroy the movie, and it's certainly exaggerated, I think, in public opinion. And I want to say this. Well, I guess I'm positive to say about his suit, and that is I really like the effect where you can see a visual representation of him using. Hang on, let me scroll through my notes. What is he using? The emerald energy of willpower.
No, there's the scene towards the end where he's in his final fight with Parallax and like he's resisting, like he's got the ring up and he's like resisting Parallax trying to like destroy him, and he's got this shield up, and you just see like the energy just pulsing through his suit while he's doing this. And that was criticized. I'm like, man, I think that looks awesome. Like I thought that in like that visual alone, where like he's got Parallax like beating down on him, like ready to destroy him, and he's sitting there like you can see the sweat on his face and like all of that, but he's just got that energy pulsing through him. And I'm just like, this looks really cool.
Yeah. And it can be a really hard thing to sell. His powers are made of like light, basically, right? So it's hard to give it some weight. But I think by showing him his exertion with that effect, it helps bring the whole thing together, really sell it. I thought of that scene and the scene with Kilowog where he's training him and he drops all that heavy stuff on him, and he's again holding it up above his head, and you can see all the energy pulsing.
Like you can see it when he does like smaller things. There's almost nothing. Like he creates like a necklace for Carol at some point that doesn't register, but then like when he's doing the heavier involved stuff, like you can see that it's like pulsing. And I think that's a great look, and I think it sets it apart because again, you're talking about trying to make things individual. And I just think it looks really cool.
I think at the heart of a story, it's a really good one, a really good character arc for Hal Jordan. You know, he's chosen really for his potential to be fearless, not because he's ready right now to be Green Lantern, but it's about his potential. And he's got to overcome his fear of commitment by dedicating himself to the cause. It's really paralleled really well with the romantic side plot. You get the hint that they have a history, but he was never willing to commit to her. And then he becomes a Green Lantern and he tries to quit and walk away. And it's only when he commits himself to being a hero, to being a Green Lantern, that he's also ready to commit himself to his love interest. I think it's smart. It's a good through line. I mean, it worked for me.
I think it's a good approach too, because like they don't necessarily dive into it too much, but like even just on his family life, like that's his big thing is he's kind of just drifting around. The only thing it feels like he's committed to even remotely in this movie is his friendship with Tom.
I would be friends with Taika Waititi too.
Who wouldn't? But no, I think that's sold really well, and I think it's a good analog to make as far as like trying to marry the like grounded and ungrounded pieces of the film, so that no matter how fantastic the movie gets, there's still that human element to it. And I think that's a good move. I think it's a very good move for this.
I think the character design is great through and through. We've talked about some of the Green Lanterns I like. I like the way the villain looks. You sort of see it, essentially the villain is just a big yellow blob, right? But you can see like past, I don't know, souls that he's captured trying to escape. I thought that was really cool. So the villain is Parallax. I'm not an expert on Green Lantern. All I think I know about Parallax is that it is Hal Jordan. I'm guessing this is a pretty big departure from the comic books.
Just to touch back on the character designs, one of the other we didn't mention this during the casting, but one of the other characters I really, really like in this is Abin Sur, who's played by Tamura Morrison, known more commonly now as playing Boba Fett in The Mandalorian and Jango Fett in the prequels. He also shows up as Thomas Curry in Aquaman, and a variety of other places. But Abin Sur, I think, is a mix of practical and CG, because I do think he plays the on-set version, but I like the approach they took with his character of making his skin kind of translucent so you could see the muscle fibers and stuff like that under his skin. I just thought that was a really cool look. And I think Tamura Morrison is somebody else that kind of gets it, because like he definitely tries to sell the gravitas of what he's doing in his brief moments as Abin Sur.
Not a lot of screen time, but important dialogue.
He's the guy that gives the ring to Hal Jordan. The story of how he does that is always different. And in this version, they make his demise the result of Parallax. And so, I just wanted to give a shout out to that, because I actually do think he's a very good thing in this movie.
Yeah. You know what else I like about him, or his character and the design work is he's in the opening scene of the movie. You see him like on the run, basically, and his ship that he's using, it's very tall.
Right.
It's like a tall diamond shape. It's not the type of ship you normally see,
Right.
and I like that because let's get real nerdy here. In space, you don't
There's no
need
drag.
to look like a jet. Yeah, that you don't need. There's no air resistance to account for. You don't need to be aerodynamic with no air resistance,
Right.
so you can look like anything. So the fact that they embraced that and made it look all weird, I think was
I like
cool.
it. It's a cool look, but no, I think taking liberties like that, I think, is cool, and it shows again that you're trying to make it individual, you're trying to make it different, and not just different for no reason, but just make it unique. Anyway, so Parallax, yes, Parallax is probably the biggest departure in this movie because the story of Parallax in this movie essentially is that the Guardians tried to harness the emerald energy of will, contrasted.
That's what my notes
contrasted
say,
with the golden energy of fear, or they call it the yellow power of fear. So apparently in the past, the Guardians tried to harness that for themselves. They deemed that it was too unstable and basically couldn't be appropriately handled, but a Guardian still succumbed to it and became Parallax. The way Parallax is in the comics is, again, this is a lot of information.
Bring it.
Essentially, all of the colors of the visible spectrum all have their own power associated with them. So green is obviously willpower, yellow is fear, and then obviously like red is rage, orange is avarice. There's one for all.
I like how you're saying obviously. Of course, green is a willpower. Of course.
Of course. What else would it be? But they all have their own color, and that gets expanded on in the Green Lantern comics. But so the typical is green is willpower, yellow is fear, even though green willpower is not typically seen as an emotion. Each power in that regard has an entity that is essentially the embodiment of it. The green one is a character named Ion, and in yellow, that is a being called Parallax, who looks like a space grasshopper. The Guardians, years ago, imprisoned Parallax inside the central power battery because they got into a battle with him, and that's where they put him. That initially, at least as part of Green Lantern Rebirth, is where the yellow weakness that Green Lanterns had came from, because the entity of the yellow power was inside their power battery. Needless to say, though, he is not a space cloud. He is the yellow embodiment of fear who possesses Hal Jordan and turns him into Parallax, and then eventually becomes a symbol for the Sinestro Corps when they become a thing.
Yeah, I'm listening to you explain Parallax, and none of that sounds familiar to me.
None of that made it into this movie. I think this is really.
So did they just take the name and apply it
for lack of a better way to put it?
Is this like a new villain?
Yeah, really. I mean, they're calling him Parallax. There's elements of a villain called Legion here, who Legion is a different villain that is just a yellow giant monstrous robot.
Well, that name makes sense with his design. Like I mentioned, he's got people trapped inside of him trying to escape.
And Legion in the comics is very similar. Like he was thousands of souls that became this collective that had a grudge against the Guardians. And that was what Legion was. And so with his design and his look in here, Legion represents it by having it be a former Guardian. There's elements of Krona here as well, who is a Guardian who tried to witness the birth of the universe, and he's an impetus for the Corps being formed. Like there's a lot of different little pieces that got thrown together into Parallax to create this kind of very, I'll say, generic, monstrous villain that just is supposed to be this kind of ultimate thing that we're all afraid of.
Okay, well, thanks for walking us through that. You mentioned the Guardians a few times. Yes. I do want to talk about them because, again, just like the movie opening with the hang on, let me tell my notes. Emerald energy of willpower.
Wait, what was that again? One more time.
Emerald energy of willpower, Andrew.
Okay. All right, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I heard it right.
Just like the movie is able to drop a line like that and really dig into the comic books, they're not afraid to show you the Guardians, which are a pretty
strange concept.
I'm gonna say silly in a loving way. I mean, comics can get silly, and that's part of what I like about them. And they just show these little these little blue aliens that just sit on top of a high chair for eternity and talk about protecting the universe.
Yeah, they really don't do anything up there. No, it's a very odd. It's a weird thing. They're a bunch of little blue people that just sit at the top of this citadel and call the shots, essentially.
It's fun to see on the big screen, though. Even though I haven't read a lot of Green Lantern specifically, I love seeing weird stuff from comic books
Yeah.
making its way
And
onto the big screen.
This has a lot of that.
Yeah, let me ask this question. We talked a lot about how the villain is a big departure from the comics, but overall, do you think this is a good adaptation of Green Lantern and what the book is all about?
Outside Parallax, which I as we have established is pretty far gone from what Parallax is in the comics. The rest of it is all within the ballpark, I think. Like I said, the story of why Abin Sur crashes and where he crashes, that stuff has shifted a lot in the comics already. Hal Jordan having his training stuff with Sinestro being a member of the Corps when he starts, that's something that became a more recent addition, but I like that. It creates a kinship between them, and it also makes the vendetta between them very personal. So by and large, the rest of this movie is all in the ballpark.
Well, to bring up our boy Mark Strong again, one thing I like that they do with Sinestro, I know that Sinestro eventually becomes a bad guy. Like, I know that going into the movie. But I think if you didn't know that, it's not telegraphed from the beginning. And I like that. A lot of times, whenever these movies are setting something like that up, the actor leans into it way too hard from the beginning. And Mark Strong is serious, but he's not menacing or evil. You don't feel like this guy is going to make a turn.
No.
Even though if you're familiar with the story, that's what he's going to do.
I would almost say it's the opposite. Like, the fact that this guy is going to turn is almost a shock based off his portrayal. Like, he seems
it looks like his arc is just Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan is earning his respect.
Right. Like,
that seems to be his only arc.
Like, it's the something where, like, he's so dedicated to the cause, which, to be fair, that's a big part of the comics, is that idea that he's so dedicated to the cause that he eventually falls is a shock. Yeah, the way this movie sells it, outside maybe that post-credit sequence, you wouldn't necessarily know that he's going to turn. Everything he does within the movie seems to be driven by a dedication to the Corps. So
let's talk about that post-credit sequence.
Yes.
You mentioned the yellow ring.
Yes.
So in the post-credits, Sinestro has the yellow ring. He puts it on, and he becomes a yellow lantern. Is that the right term for it?
They call it the Sinestro Corps instead of the Green Lantern Corps. So they are. So he becomes. But he gets a suit that is reminiscent of his Sinestro Corps uniform, because
you can see the yellow in his eyes.
Yeah.
It's a very cool visual. Normally, I would say this is a bad post-credit scene because his turn is something you can do over the course of an entire movie.
Right.
And they're doing a lot just in a short scene. But knowing that we never get a Green Lantern sequel, knowing that we may never see Mark Strong as Sinestro again, I'm glad this exists. I'm glad we have the cool visual of Mark Strong as Sinestro in full Sinestro Corps gear.
And I agree. And I'd actually never thought about it that way until you just brought it up now. But it is a cool visual. But basically, the gist of how that ring comes into existence is the movie essentially seems to be selling that the Green Lanterns are not strong enough on their own to defeat Parallax. They need to use his own power against him. So basically, Sinestro successfully lobbies the Guardians to make a yellow ring.
Yellow is more powerful, but harder to control.
Yeah, well, yellow is fear, Parallax is fear, so they're thinking that fighting Sinestro with his own powers would be more effective. So they create the ring, and like as he's about to use it, Hal Jordan shows up and basically says, "No, you can't do this. You can't give in to fear." There's a moment I like there where Hal Jordan basically turns to them and he's like, "Let me try on my own." He's like, "If you're not going to help me, fine, but you need to let me try this on my own before you do this." And there's this moment where Sinestro kind of looks at him, and you can see it's that first moment of like Sinestro being like, maybe I'm wrong about you.
Maybe the ring made the right choice.
Yeah, like that moment of just like, oh, you're literally willing, despite literally having just joined us and knowing what Parallax has done to the other Lanterns, you are still willing to basically throw yourself on the grenade to try. And he's like, that sort of thing. You can see the moment. Like, Mark Strong just sells it with his face, basically. And then he's basically like, "Good luck, Green Lantern." And he doesn't call him Jordan. He doesn't call him human. He doesn't call him whatever. Specifically calls him Green Lantern. And I'm like, that, again, he just sells it. But it's very cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
But then that obviously leads to Hal Jordan succeeding. So they don't use the ring and all of that. And but
now we've been calling it a post-credit scene with Sinestro. It's actually technically it's a mid-credit scene because there is a post-credit scene. This movie does something that I've literally never seen any other superhero movie do that I love. Do you remember what is after the credits?
The post-credit scene is an ad for comics, right?
It's an ad for comics. It shows you the Blackest Night covers, and it says, "Go read more Green Lantern," and that is super cool. That is
Yes.
something every single superhero movie should do. It's something that Marvel and DC are surprisingly bad at doing.
Right.
It seems like such a natural avenue to get fans of the movies to go into comic book shops and read these books, but there's very little push to do so. So I'd love seeing an ad for
Genuine,
tangible,
honest
physical
comics. Yeah.
comic books. Yeah.
And
Super
yeah,
cool.
it's very cool. And like that's something that, like, again, you'd think it'd be easy to do. Like even in like the pre-credits roll or something, like even in the ads.
Yeah.
Like
Or just put comics in movie theaters, right? They're only in comic book stores where, unless you're specifically seeking them out, you're not just going to stumble across comic books.
No.
Put them in movie theaters, give them away with ticket sales.
I liked
Get 'em out there.
There's something Alamo Drafthouse used to do, may still do when movie theaters come back. But anytime like a comic book movie was coming out, they would almost always team up with a local store to set up like
I've
shop.
seen that.
And I thought that was always cool.
Yeah.
It was sometimes opening night, sometimes they do it through the weekend, but they'd be like, "Hey, we're opening this movie, bring your stuff," like stuff you think fans of the movies would like. And I always thought that was cool. I always thought that was a really cool thing to do. And like I've seen it where like they give away like digital comics, but it's like a code you have to go redeem. And I realize that's still something, but like you're adding a bunch of steps and that makes people far less likely to do it. But
Definitely
if you just handed somebody something when they bought a ticket,
they're probably going to crack it open at some point.
How? Before they even watch the movie, probably. I have something to do in this 2 hours before the movie starts. So yeah, I like that. I'd forgotten about that until I rewatched it. But
I was very happy to see that. So look, I had a great time with this movie.
Yeah.
I would likely watch it again just for fun, just because I enjoyed it, not try to pick it apart. I'm not going to pretend like it's perfect.
No.
It does run a bit long. Whenever it opens up and it gives us all that exposition, I kind of thought it was, okay, let's get this out of the way and jump into the action.
Yeah.
It still takes us time with the exposition. It explains things a few times, maybe more than it needs to. I know there's an extended cut of this movie. I think that's the opposite problem. I think it's much more solid if you cut a few things out that maybe aren't necessary. But as it is, there's a lot to like. There's a lot of scenes that genuinely work. And if you're like me and you've never seen the movie, I'm sure it's streaming somewhere. Maybe rent it for 99 cents.
I think it's on HBO Max.
It's worth seeking out.
I think it's on HBO
Yes,
Max.
I did. I did see that it was coming to HBO Max at the very least.
Yeah.
So yeah, give it a stream, give it a watch. It's a good time.
Yeah.
I certainly liked it.
It's like I said, if it's something that I think even if you have watched it and you didn't enjoy it, I think to go back now and kind of reevaluate it with a bit of modern lens. This movie's barely 10 years old. It's
this
weird.
movie again.
It's weird enough to think that this is 10 years old.
It is. That's part of its charm. It's almost refreshing. This movie came out the year before Avengers, and Avengers changes everything.
Right.
After Avengers, it's all about building this big extended universe. And look, I love the MCU. I like all their movies. I see them all as soon as I can. But we kind of know what to expect with a lot of superhero movies these days. They're all kind of cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
And this movie is different.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It's worth watching.
I agree. Check it out. I think you will be surprised.
Thank you to Mark Benavides of Rogues Among Us for singing our theme song. Follow at NotThatMarkAnthony on Instagram. If you like the show, please tell a friend, rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help. And follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Thank you.